Hello. So I was reading the story and the impact statement or the witness testimony from the priest who was stabbed by a young person, a 16-year-old, I think male, right? And apparently the young male has been or had been radicalized by online Islamic content, right? And he attacked the Irish military because of their actions in or working with the UN or working related to the UN in Mali, right? So we're told that the young fellow is an Irish national, and to a degree, I suppose it doesn't really matter, right? So let's just say that he is an ethnically Irish person. His parents are Irish. He's Irish blood and bone, right? Let's just assume that. There's a conversation that needs to happen, and not necessarily between people, right? But within each person to reconcile a conversation to reconcile the Christian ethic and the organic Irish ethic. Is there a difference? And can we separate both of them out? Having been kind of muddled and molded and in a symbiotic way shaping one another, have we mixed all the colours of Mála together so much that we can't disentangle them again? Or are there distinguishing markers, specific markers in each one of these views that would allow us to identify and distinguish the difference between both, if indeed there is any, in which case then we could separate the two of them and evaluate them individually, right? And see where one lets the other down and vice versa. And I think we can do that, right? Because we, as scarce as pre-Christian writings, philosophical texts or ideas, as rare as they are or as scarce as they are, we still have enough, right? And particularly Ireland we say that Ireland punches above its weight in terms of literature and musical output and the creative sort of arts, right? But it also does in terms of mythology and philosophy to a massive degree as well, right? And an understated degree too. And a lot of early Christian to medieval Irish thinkers, in the handful that we have, right, their view on Christianity, or not even their view on Christianity, their view in very Christian times, right, it emphasizes traits that aren't or would not be seen as universally Christian, right? There's elements of some other thinking that creep into these theologians, right, that speaks of a more Western European generally and native Irish specifically. You can call it Gaelic or Celtic or whatever you want, right? Celtic only goes so far back, right? There's been Irish lived experience for thousands of years prior to what are deemed the Celtic times, right? So to kind of encapsulate it all under the Celtic umbrella is not really fair to the Irish people who were here thousands of years prior to what is seen as the Celtic invaders or visitors or whatever you want to call them, right? Or colonizers, if you want. So there has been thousands and thousands of years of fleshed out Irish thinking, and it carries in Irish mythology. There's always I won't even say morality, right? But there are enough stories and characters that take the forefront of each story and display certain traits and tendencies and weaknesses and strengths that we're painted with a huge mosaic and a zodiac of human characteristics, tendencies, and reactions to things, right? And temperaments. And there's very little moral overlay on those stories, right? So Irish mythology in and of itself, obviously it was written down and recorded by monks who would be deemed as Christian, who, given the political and religious framework of the day, had to colour, or were even disposed to colour, native pagan elements through the lens of Christianity, or through the kaleidoscope of Christianity, right? But you can see this when you're reading it, because you can see the obvious Christian overlay into some of Irish mythology, right? And it tends to be the case that just moralizing certain things, right? So saying that one act of one character was a bad or an evil one, that's a Christian overlay, right? Because there's a Christian morality being painted over Irish mythology, right? And there's a distinguishing element there, so we can disentangle that. And when we can take Irish mythology without the morality, right? Because what we get to do then is not be told what acts are good and what acts are bad. We get to project into those stories and absorb from those stories scenarios that we empathize with, and then we act out in our own imagination just based on reading it or hearing it, right? We empathize with the characters in it. And then that will stir up our own feelings around those sorts of, any sort of decision that's made in these stories, right? They're like, in psychology we have, right? There are projective tools that psychiatrists and psychologists might use, and people might have heard of the Rorschach cards, right? Where a psychiatrist will show you a white square with some sort of ink blot on it, and you're meant to tell them what you see in the ink blot, right? And many people might have the same interpretation of what they're seeing, or might draw a similar interpretation from the ink blots. And then the idea is that somebody who is a little more psychologically disturbed or whatever, right, they will read into something, or they will draw something from the ink blot that really on the surface of it has no business being related to it. But that move to relate one thing to another, or to read into something from one's own mind, that tells the psychiatrist something about the person's inner landscape, right? What their inner motivations and thinking are. Perhaps not motivations, but at least their inner thinking, right? What it looks like, how they see the world. Right? Some people see a butterfly, other people will see a smashed open skull, right? That sort of thing. It's like, whoa, what happened to you, right? What happened to you? So those things are revealing, and mythology can serve as the same sort of thing, right? And we can reflect on it and meditate on it if you want, but think about it. And while reading it or listening to these stories, we observe what is going on in ourselves. What part of the story makes us feel proud of the character, or what parts of us feel inspired by the character, or what parts of the story bring up feelings of disgust or betrayal or whatever in those stories, right? And it is through our own reaction to these stories that we can begin to establish and build our own value system, or to recognize what is probably already a latent value system in ourselves, right? And it is through that interaction of story, imagination, and our own empathy that we can uncover and discover things about ourselves, right? And outside of that, then there is no need for an overlay of a morality overlay, or an overlay of morality, which comes with Christianity, right? Certain things are good and certain things are bad. And then that's just the case universally. Pre-Christian thought would say, well, not necessarily. Like, look, life is a buffet, right? And we're all prone to cycle through these different traits and archetypes or tendencies in human behavior, human understanding, and human morality ourselves, right? So there's no point in chopping off half of them and saying, don't be like that, because at some point in your life you're going to be like that. And it's best to understand and try and draw out the bit of wisdom you can, knowing full well that you're going to make decisions that are morally bad over the course of your life, right? And it is a healthier approach to accept that you're going to fall prey of these things, if you can even paint it that way. You're going to make mistakes in life. You're better off not tarnishing these tendencies and spend your life trying to avoid them, right? Because you don't learn anything from them then. You just spend your life separating out certain parts of yourself and certain parts of your own behavior from your own understanding, right? And we lose as a result of that, right? So why I'm talking about all of that as well, and it's probably a big load of nonsense to some people, right? But it's just my thoughts on it, is with this story of the priest that was stabbed in the army barracks and reading his impact statement. I recognise that there's an argument going on there, not just in the priest, right, but it's nearly reflective of Irish society based on the movement of time and our tendencies prior and what's going on now and what we will choose to become in the future. And that is the idea of forgiveness. The idea of forgiveness, or the virtue, as we're told, of forgiveness. We're told to accept it a priori based just in and of itself. It's known as a good thing to be forgiving. And I don't know about that, right? It's a bit too universal for me. And it's not surprising that the word Catholic means universal, right? So Catholicism at its inception and over the course of its growth, was an ideology, a religious belief, if you want, that viewed itself as the rightful heir to the whole of the earth. Universal, right? Universal. That was its aim, and it got pretty far, right? And I don't think that battle is over for it yet. It just kind of dons different clothes, right? The Jesuit doesn't always come with a collar on, okay? He is a science teacher. He is an English scholar, all that sort of stuff, right? But the battle is just the flux, right, of changing of ages. We've been steeped in Catholicism and Christian ethic and worldview for so long that it's become ingrained in us. But there were also prior worldviews that we had and that were ingrained in us before we adopted the Christian ethic and the Christian worldview. And those two things, are they complementary in ways? Yeah, sure. But are they also antagonistic in ways? They absolutely are, right? They absolutely are. And there's many different factors to the antagonism between a pre-Christian Irish view and a Christian Irish view, right? And this doesn't mean we throw the baby out with the bathwater and just declare Christ dead and Christianity a total waste of time and all bad, because we're just doing the same thing here, right? We're nearly adopting the Christian ethic to condemn the Christian ethic. So it's a bit of a nonsense, right? We accept that I accept that Christianity has been a huge part of Irish life, and it will go down as a huge part of Irish history. And to read a history of Irish people by plucking out the influence of Christianity in Irish history would render Irish history unintelligible. You would not be able to understand Irish history if you were to remove the Catholic or Christian influence from it, right? That doesn't mean that Christianity made Irish people what they were and made Irish history what it is. It just means it's a flavour of Irish history. It's certainly a solid ingredient to it, right? And to try and read one without the other, even Christian history, to try and understand Christian history without factoring in the Irish influence into Christian history, would be to render Christianity unintelligible, because there was many influences that went that way, right? And that's kind of getting to the crux of what my issue is around this thing. The idea of forgiveness. So when is it beneficial for us to forgive? Where do we claim the right to forgive acts of evil? Is that something that we have granted to ourselves, or is that something that is even necessary or is even sound morally, right? And I don't know about yourselves, right? And it could be because I'll be judged by Christian standards. I am a fallen man who has not accepted the grace of God, right? I have not overcome myself. I've not died on the cross to be resurrected as Christ did. I have not overcome my mortal nature, right? My fallen state, my innately sinful state. right? So I have not seen the world through the love of the Christian God's eyes. Therefore, what I'm going to say next is limited, right? But when is forgiveness beneficial to Irish people, and when is it not, right? And is there a value to it? Is there really a value to it, or is it a vice that we become hooked on because there are other benefits to acting in a forgiving way, or to be seen as being acting in a forgiving way, or for being a forgiven person, right? And I also think that if I was to be murdered and I was to watch how my family would react, right? And then my family members are going up shaking the hand and accepting an apology and forgiving the person that did that to me, I would imagine I would be very hurt and let down by that. Right, and therefore, not even therefore, but I could also see myself in the role of betrayer and traitor if I was to forgive and accept an apology from someone who intentionally hurt or injured or murdered any friend or family member of my own, right? I wouldn't see that as being the bigger person or taking the moral high ground. I would understand that people would see it as such, but I reject that totally. And I think I'm on sound foundations for rejecting that, because I practically and pragmatically, I don't think it serves the interest of Irish people to have someone in a position of influence, and just not to isolate the priest here, but he's in a position of influence, right? He has a moment in time where he can say something, and his words are that he forgives the person and hopes he goes on to make better decisions in the future, right? And fair enough. That's he can make his peace with that, and he's consistent in his obvious worldview, which is a Christian one, and in his actions as well. So fair play to him. I just reject it totally, right? He had not just him, but you could have put yourself in his position and recognized that there's a time and a place for saying things. He could have forgiven that person in his own heart and in his private life and not had to share that with people, right? Because his forgiving of this person will more than likely, given the impact statement, will more than likely alter the sentence that's been given to that young fella. I'm not sure if he's been sentenced yet, but impact statements have an effect on that, right? So if the priest's forgiveness of this young man reduces the sentence that the young fella gets, then the priest's actions and sharing of his own personal morality, and I suppose it's implicit that this morality is the good one, because we've been soaked in it for so long, and it should be accepted by other people, and other people should follow suit, right? And that's the danger, that the young fella won't get as long as he would have if the priest had come out and said, I don't forgive him. He destroyed my trust in people to a degree. He destroyed my feeling of safety going to work and all that sort of stuff, right? So the priest's words and his forgiveness and his morality will likely play into this young fella getting a lesser time in jail than he would have otherwise, which means he's going to be out earlier. And it all depends then on what your view of human nature is, right? So can someone like this change your faith in the justice system? Does going to jail actually make people reflect on their morality and their view of violence and evil? And will it do so to the young fella, right? We don't know these things, so it's a gamble, right? And it's a gamble that if the young fella turns out to have never changed his ways after a sentence is over, it is other people in Ireland that will suffer at the hands of this person, right? And will the priest be so quick to come and forgive that time? Or is the priest expecting that we should all forgive while allowing for justice to be served? We should all forgive in the hope that someone will do better next time. Because when does that hope hit a wall? How many bodies are needed before that hope hits a wall? That particular ideologies are going to gravitate towards certain behaviours based on the ideology, right? It's consistent. History is consistent with these things. We should learn from that. And I just think that grappling with the the morality and ethic of forgiveness for evil is something that has rendered Irish people frozen in the spot in terms of how do we proceed now, given the obvious growth of this disregard for human life, disregard for intersubjective morality between Irish people, right? And a disregard for freedom and the safety of other people. It's growing in Ireland, right? It's increasing. There's more and more violence. Ireland is not as safe as it once was. So what is our response now? And this instance reflects back to Ireland something that is very, very, very familiar in these, what would you even call it, the existential loneliness and abandonment in these times where we're moving from being aligned with a specific religious belief to detaching from it, pulling it off of us, right? Caught in the briars, just separating out, right? But not really knowing what to do next. It's rendered us slightly useless. And I think it will continue to do so, so long as we don't, as Nietzsche would say, reevaluate our value system, right? So what are the conditioned responses that Irish people have to X, Y, Z? Okay. Are they historical? When did they come online? Are they reflective in my reactions to things? And if so, what is natural to me? What is instinctual to me? And what is a Christian overlay of that? Things that I have absorbed and I've been told are the ways I should react instead of how I want to react, right? And there's great work in all of this for people, and I think disentangling that will allow, once, essentially this is the case, right? Once we decide what values we hold dear, because we've decided it, not because it was decided for us or because we were told it was the best way to be, but because we've decided it, because we believe in it, right? We know it to be the correct way of living. Then we will be able to make serious national decisions, because we will not fall in line, right? But we will understand and truly empathize and see one another's perspective on these things. But up until that point where we get out of this flux of, I want to do this, but that's not the right thing to do, we're not going to go anywhere. We will just get more of the same, which is increased hostilities in Ireland, ethnic divide and conflict, and the continued horrible treatment of Irish people, which Irish people have accepted in this country.